One of the things about the combine is that we get media availability from not only the general manager, but the head coach. Todd Monken's availability will come tomorrow, and I will cover his availability just as I am covering Andrew Berry's availability. But Andrew Berry stepped up, answered some questions at the scouting combine, and that's what we're going to talk about, just kind of what he talked about there and what kind of insight that gives us into what the Browns' plan is going to be for free agency, which is coming up in about a month or less than a month, actually, a couple of weeks now, and what the plan is going to be for the draft after free agency. So let's jump into the press conference. Andrew Berry's words here about the Cleveland Browns.
You know, Chris, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that youth equals, lack of performance. I think two of the three youngest teams this past year were Philadelphia and Green Bay. I think, we're a little bit unique in the NFL where it's not like, baseball where a team, a prospect has to be in the farm system for 7 years before they hit the big league level. There is certainly an adjustment period for young players, but we want to have high expectations for guys that, that come into our program to be role players, to ascend into starters, and I think we saw that this past year with this past draft class. Chris, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that youth equals lack of performance. I think two of the three youngest teams this past year were Philadelphia and Green Bay. I think, we're a little bit unique in the NFL where it's not like, baseball where a team, a prospect has to be in the farm system for 7 years before they hit the big league level. There is certainly an adjustment period for young players, but we want to have high expectations for guys that, that come into our program to be role players, to ascend into starters, and I think we saw that this past year with this past draft class.
All right, so one of the things that they brought up to him is how, it felt like to some people in the media that there was a disconnect between the Browns saying that they have goals to win some games this year versus them also saying that they're going to be purposefully young, right? This is something I brought up with Daniel. If we say it's other beat reporters out there have brought up this concern, and he's saying that he feels like it's a misconception that being young means that you have to be a bad football team from a win-loss record standpoint. I would say kind of, right? I get what he's saying. If you get really good young players, you can be a good team despite being young. But also inherently the sacrifice in having young players is giving unproven players opportunities. And when you're in a position to give unproven players opportunities, it's usually because you're willing to sacrifice from a win-loss perspective, right? That's usually what you go into it with. Yes, there is a high-end outcome that you could win some games, but is it necessarily fair to say that the goal is still to win at the same level where you would be signing veterans to fill those spots? I don't think so. But let's go into Andrew's next question here. It's about Joe Bitonio.
Tony, Joel's still working through that. And, at this point in his career, and this point in his life, he deserves the time and space to do that, stay in regular communications, and we'll work through that at the appropriate time.
Okay, so I think he expanded more on this with his second media availability of the day. He made it clear that, hey, if Joe wants to play next season, Joel is more than welcome to play. I do think that would be interesting, right? Because on one hand, the Browns are trying to get younger. He talks about in this video trying to get younger guys opportunities and not necessarily closing off a ton of space for veterans. And if you brought back Joe Bitonio, you would be doing exactly that. But on the other hand, it's Joe Bitonio, right? If he wants to retire a Brown, you're going to let him retire a Brown, even if that means one more year. The big question with Joel is is the level of play still justifiable to start him? Because I don't want to get to a place, and it felt like we almost got to that place last year, where you would want to have to bench Joel, and that's how he has to go out. So I get their loyalty to Joe, And I get Joel wants to keep playing, but I really do think it's in both teams' best interest for Joel to retire and for the Browns to let Joel retire. We'll see what decision Joel comes down to, but that's just my 2 cents on it.
Ample room for free agency. How aggressive do you expect to be, especially compared to last year?
No, great question. So, Scott, I would anticipate that there's at least the chance that we would be a little bit more aggressive I'll say this, more aggressive than last year. But it'll be targeted and opportunistic. I think, realistically, we may be one more offseason away from being like hyper aggressive in that window. But if there's something that fits us, fits our roster, fits our timeline, then it's certainly a swing we'll take.
That's a very interesting answer. I'm going to play that answer back because I think there was a lot in there that he did not successfully hide in that answer. So,
how aggressive do you expect to be, especially compared to last year?
No, great question. So, Scott, I would anticipate that there's at least the chance that we would be a little bit more aggressive more aggressive than last year.
See, that the chance that we will be more aggressive, and then he just kind of fumbles into we're going to be more aggressive than we were last year, right? So last year, very passive free agency period. We all thought it would be passive. It was a very passive free agency period. I think their biggest signing was maybe Malik Collins, and that was less than $10 million. So he's saying on one hand, they will be more aggressive. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to spend $40 million on somebody or multiple $20 million contracts. But he also mentions that, like, hey, we're probably realistically a year away from being ultra aggressive. Let's play that part again.
But it'll be targeted and opportunistic. I think, realistically, we may be one more offseason away from being like hyper aggressive in that window. But if there's something that fits us, fits our roster, fits our timeline, then it's certainly a swing we'll take.
All right. So fits us, fits our roster. We're about a year away from being hyper aggressive. What I think he is saying is the Browns are in a similar kind of place building wise that they were in 2022. Like, we remember 2022 where they took a couple of aggressive swings in free agency. Obviously, they got Deshaun Watson, but they didn't really know if Deshaun was going to play in 2022, so they weren't ultra aggressive. And in 2023 was the year where they decided to be ultra aggressive in free agency behind Deshaun Watson. I think it's a similar plan where they're thinking, hey, this year we're hoping to make steps, become a respectable team, somewhere around 500, whether it be a game or two below it or a game or two above it. But we're certainly not going to make long-term sacrifices to reach that win-loss goal. We think we should be able to reach it with young talent. And then after that season, they're saying we're going to go and be aggressive. Now, the question is like, okay, you don't have a quarterback. So how does that factor into things about how aggressive you're going to be, which comes into matching our timeline? Expect the free agents that the Browns spend money on to be under 27 years old. Maybe 27 at the oldest, but under 27 years old. And I'm not saying that they will only bring in under 27-year-old free agents, but the ones they spend a lot of money on, those are going to be guys under 27 years old, right? So you're talking about a Rasheed Walker. You're talking about potentially a Tyler Linderbaum, an Elijah Vera Tucker, right? If they're going to spend $20+ million on a player, it's probably going to be somebody younger. So think less big money contract for Tyreek Hill and more maybe they're kicking the tires on Alec Pierce, right? Somebody that they see as an up-and-comer or making trades for players that they feel are in that up-and-coming range. So think about that as we go forward about how the Browns will move. They want to make moves that will make them better this year, sure, but will keep them good for the next 2-3 years because their window to win, I think, like their window to believe that they could be a championship contender. We'll see if they get there. But it feels like the current plan as it's being illustrated by Andrew Berry, whether it's successful or not, it feels like the plan is to be good in 2027. Like, not just over 500 good, but they're trying to be a championship contender around 2027, 2028. And if you look at the rebuild timeline and you look at timelines of teams like the Seattle Seahawks, who just won the Super Bowl, it matches up, right? Seattle, 2 years, really just rebuilding, getting young players on the roster, accumulating young talent. And in year 3 and 4 was when they were more aggressive, willing to make more aggressive decisions. It also coincided to when they fired Pete Carroll and then brought in Mike McDaniel, right? 2 years into the rebuild, they fire Pete. They bring in Mike McDonald to be the head coach. Things kind of accelerate from there. So it is worth pointing out, like, I think that's kind of the timeline that they hope they can be on. Got to find a quarterback. How does quarterback factor into this? I don't know, right? Like, are they really in on Malik Willis? That probably means they're not going after Aaron Rodgers, right? I think he also says something illuminating here where he's like, hey, we're not going to go after older players to just fill spots because we want to leave opportunities open for younger players. There's something there, right? Let's continue.
Yeah, it is, Ashley, because I think, we're still, building out this new core. I think also, roster spots, they're commodities. And I think one of the things that we want to continue to lean into that we did last year is having roster spots open for young players to contribute and grow and play, as opposed to necessarily maybe blocking them for, a short-term solution, based with where our team is currently.
We're going to have some spots open for some young guys to play. Might apply to the quarterback situation, right? Maybe they're thinking they go after somebody young. Maybe they're thinking, hey, we're just going to give one of these rookies a chance to play here if that's the opportunity. It does say to me that the Browns aren't going to be interested in doing what they did last year, which is bringing in a 36-year-old Joe Flacco. 36. I don't think Joe Flacco's 36. I think he's like 40. Bringing in a 40-year-old Joe Flacco to be like the safety blanket option, right? I think that last year was the plan of like, hey, Joe Flacco can be the safety blanket. If nobody else pans out, we'll go with Joe. I think they'll leave that spot open, and I think the starting quarterback for the Browns will be under 28 week 1. Like, I think you can pretty much write that down in stone. So, some of the ideas going around, some of the ideas been floated to me where it's like Marcus Mariota, or that class of quarterback, which I really wouldn't be a big fan of, to be honest with you. Like, I don't really see a distinguishable difference between a Marcus Mariota and just kind of rolling the dice on what you have in the room. I think there is a difference there. Marcus is a professional quarterback, and we don't know if that's true with the guys on the roster, but still, I mean, it's not a distinguishable difference enough for me to think that it's going to change our win-loss record is what I'm saying. So I think that they'll leave the door open for somebody younger to take the reins at quarterback, and won't necessarily go for somebody who's a veteran to hold down the fort. So we're probably looking at some younger options. Maybe if it's somebody older, it's somebody proven, like a Kyler Murray. But I do think how he's talked today makes it seem like Geno Smith is not something that they want to do. Veteran starter is not something that they want to do, and that they want to go in a younger direction at almost every position, where they're not trying to just get guys signed for a year or two at 35 years old just to hold down a spot. They're trying to give those opportunities to young players to see what they got, which is, again, it goes back to the beginning of why people have that, what Andrew Berry calls a misconception, but I think it's just the reality of the situation, which is when you're doing that, you're not maximizing to be as good as possible. So, yeah, you can have a good result, but, you're probably going to lose a game or two because you're giving a spot to somebody who you want to give an opportunity to who might not live up to it, So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Hopefully somebody steps up and they fill the hole there, which is the goal, right? I think the goal of this whole kind of process where you're utilizing youth and wanting youth to play is that somebody steps up and takes over. But there is a risk in that I don't think Andrew Berry's really acknowledging at the beginning of this press conference, which I have to assume he's aware of, we're going to start talking about the rest of this press conference. But first, I got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Talk to you guys real quick about Sleeper, the app for daily fantasy, regular fantasy. And now, if you look at the pick section on the Sleeper app and go to the team section, you have predictions that you can now use on the Sleeper app. You can choose winners of games. So let's say you're a Cavs fan, the Cavs play the Wizards or something like that, and you think the Cavs are going to beat the Wizards, you can pick the Cavs to beat the Wizards in that kind of scenario. For me personally, I went with the Cavs getting the championship this year. And of course, you know, I had to throw in the same for the Cleveland Browns winning the next Super Bowl. So if you want to join in the fun on that, make sure you join the Sleeper app. If you also want to use the Sleeper app for all the other things I mentioned, make sure you use the promo code Worst Take. Get a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code Worst Take. Make sure you join the Sleeper app.
I think you've heard me say over the years that the draft, it's really for like highest sustainable impact, and that's not to say that need or positional value doesn't have some role in that. But at the same time, it's not like you're just going to match your picks to the best of whatever. I mean, I think about a year ago at this time, I wouldn't have guessed that the draft would have played out positionally the way that it did in 2025. And you have to be flexible, and you have to be adaptable in terms of where the player pool and where the talent pool is. I think the good thing about this coaching staff, really in all three phases, is they are very adaptable to using your best player. So you have to be open to the fact that it may not look exactly the way that you'd envision it, or that you'd hope that it would look coming out of it.
Interesting. So highest sustainable impact is a way that they look at the draft, which means like for all of the people who are like, hey, we need to solve this problem day one of the draft, that's not really the philosophy that he's going with. What he's saying there is like, hey, we're drafting a player because we think in 4 or 5 years, we're going to be happier with this player at this position versus other players available, right? That was the theory with the Mason Graham selection. By drafting a defensive tackle super early, that defensive tackle is one of those positions that, tends to blossom a little bit later in a player's career. So you're talking about year 2, year 3, really year 3 being a very important year in the development for a defensive tackle. But if Mason Graham is good, there is a belief that like, hey, he's going to be good for you for the next 10 to 11 years, which obviously gives you a very sustainable impact on what he's able to provide, right? That is going to be something that they think of. I remember I got a question on Q&A that really made me think, which is somebody said, hey, Mekhi Lemon would be really good for what the Browns need right now, but in 10 years, are we going to be happy that we drafted Mekhi Lemon? And I think that's a fair question to ask. Like, yeah, he doesn't have the upside of some of the other prospects in this class. And there is a possibility that the kind of player that he is and the kind of build that he is leads to him having a pretty short lifespan as a player. So it's like, it's something to think about. It truly is. And I think that's something that Andrew Berry thinks about a great deal. So if you're thinking right now that the Browns are going to draft and their priority in the draft early on is going to be what will help them in week 1 of 2026, it's just not the case, right? They're focused on what's going to help them for 5 years, right? So for me, one of my hangups that I have on Caleb Downs is immediately he wouldn't be that useful for the Browns because we kind of have this awkward mix of Grant Delpit. But if you're Andrew Berry and you're thinking of Caleb Downs, you're thinking to yourself, well, yeah, year 1 might be a little awkward, but you feel really good about year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5, which is something to think about, right? The long-term view of whatever pick they go with is going to be important, especially the earlier in the draft that we're talking here, right? So those first 2 first-round picks, I expect them to be picks that have long-term sustainability kind of focused with them.
Yeah, I'd say this, Mary Kay. So I think number one, probably a better question for Todd, tomorrow when he hits the podium. I think the biggest thing
They asked him about Shedeur Sanders.
that we want to see from Shedeur is just continued growth. I think he grew a lot from start 1 to start 7. I think certainly playing more efficiency, not putting the ball, playing more efficiently, not putting the ball in harm's way as much would be important. While maintaining the ability to produce out of structure and generate explosive plays. You're not going to see all of that in the upcoming months because we're not on the field. So the biggest thing that he can do is learn the new offense. Get in with the coaching staff once our offseason program starts. Continue to work on his body physically, and then make strides when we actually get on the grass.
So those are his words on Shedeur. Pretty standard non-committal affair there. I want the young player to get better. There's certainly things he can improve. I don't think it really lends any insight. Well, here's the thing. There's been a lot of people trying to get a lot of insight from a press conference clip here or a picture here and there. The reality is all that's junk. That's garbage. You don't know anything from all that shit. Where you're going to learn about what the Browns' plans are at quarterback, it's going to happen in free agency. It's going to happen during the draft. If the Browns are truly satisfied with what they have in that quarterback room, then it will reflect in what they do in free agency and what they do in the draft. And if they do nothing at the position in free agency or the draft, or attempt to do nothing at that position in free agency or the draft, then it shows you where their priorities are, which is with the guys in that room. If they are very aggressive in free agency, if they're very aggressive in the draft, try to go and pursue a quarterback option, well, that also tells you how they feel about the room. We're trying to do some of this like pseudoscience to figure out what the Browns think of Shedeur Sanders. You don't have to work that hard, right? They will tell you what they feel about Shedeur Sanders over the next 3 months. Like, by the time we get to May, we're going to know how the Cleveland Browns feel about Shedeur Sanders, right? Especially by the time we get to training camp. So all this guessing, all this kind of like, oh, well, he said this clip here, or this guy said that thing here, or Miles said this here, or whatever it is, to try to get a positive or negative read on what Shedeur's standing is with the organization, it's really unnecessary and pointless, and just kind of like a useless endeavor. What we're going to find out about Shedeur is what the Browns actually do about the quarterback position, and the priority that they attach to it. Right now, they're talking about Shedeur like they talk about any other player on the roster. And I've seen Andrew Berry talk like that about players that he's given contracts to. I've seen Andrew Berry talk about players like that he's released 2 months after talking about that player like that. It really just doesn't give you anything useful. We'll find out by the actions of the Cleveland Browns what they actually feel versus what people are inferring that they may or may not feel.
Let me go here, and then I'll go to you. Okay. I don't think there's a fixed number there. If they're the right ones. If you're telling me I get Tristan Wirfs, Penny Sewell, and Tyler Winterball, yeah, sure, I'll take it. Yeah, those guys as rookies, yeah, sign me up.
So they asked him, is there a limit on rookies that you would play? And he said, no, if they're good, they're good. You know what I mean? Which is, I think, a fine philosophy to play. And obviously they're going to play anybody they think has potential that they can give an opportunity to. Now, I do think it's interesting that Linderbaum was part of the names that he mentioned. This is one of those Andrew Berry things, though, right? Like, this is one of the ones where, like, you hear it and you're like, but it's really a trap with Andrew, or at least I feel like it's a trap with Andrew. When he starts mentioning players by name, but he hasn't signed them, that usually tells me something other than the Browns are interested in them is going on there. Because he did this shit with Travis Hunter. He's done this shit before where he's gushing about a player and you're like, oh, the Browns are going to go sign him in free agency, or the Browns are going to go and try to draft him in the draft or whatever it is, right? And then he makes moves that are obvious that, like, he wasn't that interested in bringing that player in. In this press conference, he mentioned 2 free agents, Daniel Falele and Tyler Linderbaum. And again, if you're just listening to that and you're not really aware of how Andrew operates, you're going to be like, oh, well, he's interested in both those guys. Former Ravens, it would make sense, Todd Monken there. But part of me feels like he's trying to drive up the price there to lower the price somewhere else. I don't know if it's like for an Elijah Vera Tucker, even though I wouldn't underestimate the chance that it could be about Elijah Vera Tucker, because we've heard nothing about him, and usually hearing nothing about a player tells you that the Browns are interested. We've heard a little smoke about Rasheed Walker, who would make sense too, and it does feel like as Tyler Linderbaum's price rises to fucking incredible. It does feel like as Tyler Linderbaum's prices go all the way up to like $22, $23 million, like it's getting to ridiculous numbers here for a center. Nobody's really talking about Rashad Walker, who is the best available left tackle, and he's under 27 years old. I'm just saying, I don't know if it's like the classic Andrew Berry trap, but I will say he's not being, what do I say? He's not being unintentional about mentioning those names. He knows that they're available. He knows the connections that writers are going to have when they hear former Raven offensive lineman who's under a certain age that Andrew just kind of printed out the template, and then now he's mentioning Daniel Falele. Now he's mentioning Tyler Linderbaum. He's not being unintentional about that, but he's not trying to tell us what's happening. He's trying to, in my opinion, get them to write about Daniel Falele, get them to write about Linderbaum, get them to put more out there on those players so he can hide behind that smoke screen and do something else. That's just my 2 cents, right? That's I could be completely wrong on this. I thought they were going to draft Travis Hunter last year because I bought into like him gushing about Travis Hunter, right? So I'm trying to correct where I was wrong last year, but learning from that experience tells me maybe this is a bit of a smokescreen that he's trying to create by being very intentional about his work. Remember, he's a smart guy. Say what you want about Andrew Berry. He's a smart guy. He's a really smart guy. He's Ivy League grad, all that's there, but also just people talk about him in league circles as a smart guy. So he's not being unintentional here. He's bringing up those names with the template of free agents for a reason, because he wants them to do something. And when he says, oh, Tyler Linderbaum, right? There are a million other centers you could have thought of. Why Tyler Linderbaum? Why was that? Why wasn't it Creed Humphreys? You know what I mean? Who's like the best center in the league? Tyler Linderbaum was an interesting choice there, wasn't it? You tell me what you think. But I certainly think that Andrew Berry's being a little, I don't want to say deceptive there, but I don't think the motive is what it might appear to be upon first view. Is Andrew Berry making me a conspiracy theorist? I don't know. We did get some injury updates in this press conference. It seems like Quincy Judkins is out the boot. It does seem like they feel like DeJuan Jones will be ready to go by camp. We'll see. Luke Whippler, they also think will be ready to go by then. So going to be interested to see if those injury prognoses hold up, because we know that the Browns have a difficult history with living up to that. Like, they'll say a guy's going to be available. Remember the whole Mike Hall situation this year was like, oh, he's going to be available. It took to like halfway through the season. I wouldn't be shocked if something like that pops up with Luke Whippler again, because he did get hurt in week 18, but they seem to think that he will be fine. We'll see. But that's it. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.